basically, what are your feelings on ankle stiffness versus ankle mobility at ground contact time?
Yeah, wow. Awesome line of questions and just a really cool discussion topic. So let's talk about ankle range of motion and I guess proper, mobility for starters. That might be the easier one to talk about. Clearly, athletes need to have, acceptable levels of ankle mobility, dorsiflexion, whatever the case may be, so that they can execute just the basic movement patterns correctly, right? I mean, if they don't have proper ankle dorsiflexion, it may limit them in a squatting movement or something like that, right? So they need to have just, in low speed movements, the proper range of motion at the ankle joint. With that being said, to all of your points about stiffness and optimal levels of stiffness during top speed sprinting, there's got to be a certain amount of pretension that occurs before contact and dynamic stability that occurs so that when the foot contacts the ground and you've got 4 to 5 times body weight of force, going up through the musculoskeletal system within the first 25 milliseconds, the whole thing doesn't just collapse into the ground with excessive yielding, like you said. So I've always viewed kind of 2 basic pathways to try to improve this. I want to make, I guess, one clarifying point, because this has always been brought to my attention and it's a good one. There's some optimal level of stiffness. It's not maximal stiffness. I mean, if it's maximal stiffness, then the system just, basically breaks, right? So there's some optimal level of stiffness. That's hard to define. To your point, you want to see the athlete stiff enough that they can punch the ground and pop off of it without any excessive yielding. From a very qualitative standpoint, that's what I always define as optimal stiffness. So how do we get there? So I think it can be addressed in 2 ways with like a developmental athlete. For starters, I think, this is where plyometrics come in really handy, and just the basic ones. I mean, this is where your pogo hops or your ankle bounces, whatever you want to call them, your rudiment series. This is where that really helps translate what you're doing in the weight room and with your technique drills and just your overall speed work, and helps them develop that from a neuromuscular standpoint and just develop the feeling of, hey, the ground's coming up to meet me as I descend downward towards the ground. When do I need to turn things on? Because when you're just sprinting at 4 to 5 steps per second, that's happening too fast. So plyometrics are not only a good way just to literally, perhaps build that from a neuromuscular standpoint, but also just to kind of train, okay, hey, I need to turn on now before you strike the ground. And then I think, that's where technique work comes into play. And I know there's a little bit of a social media debate out there between, how much good do drills do? And I always view it like this, which is, well, you need to warm up your athletes somehow. You can't just go send them into, full speed 40s or 60s cold. So if you have to do a dynamic warm up, and of course, Parisi Speed School is famous for its dynamic warm up, then your warm up drills at some point in your warm up progression should have speed technique drills in them so that your athlete is, contacting the ground, and you can be cueing them on what that should look like and how it should feel like. And so I think that's a great way to develop it from a technique standpoint. So I guess going back to kind of the 2 pathways to get at it, number one is just, developing it, training it. And I really see plyometrics, and they don't even have to be the complicated ones, but just basic plyometrics as that linkage there. And on the technical side of it, just drilling it, even in your warm-up exercise. And I love the simple, basic ones where you get a lot of bang for your buck, the A march, A skip, A run, the dribble step overs, the straight leg runs, the bounds, as you were saying, where you're just kind of cueing it and watching for it and giving the athlete a context to feel that out. What should it feel like when I'm popping the ground on the ball of the foot and being reactive?